Well, alongside the nonviolent civil rights movement that produced icons like Martin Luther King Jr., American history has had its bursts of violent protests as well by radical groups. Many would consider one of those to be the Black Panthers. In his book, Black Against Empire, The History and Politics of the Black Panther Party, co-author Joshua Bloom unravels what motivated the group's members to resort to violence. Joshua is a professor of sociology at UCLA, from where he joins us. Joshua, welcome to Arise America. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Debbie. Good to be here.
You know, talk to us a little bit about the psychology. Of course, during the days of the big civil rights struggle in this country, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were two schools of thought. There was change by nonviolence, which was championed by Dr. Martin Luther King, and then there was also change by any means necessary. Can you sort of talk to me about the psychology of that from a protester's standpoint?
Absolutely. I think in many ways the situation is very much parallel to Ferguson in the sense that it was really a temporal change. In the early 60s, the civil rights movement and nonviolent civil disobedience and challenges to Jim Crow were very effective at dismantling formal and legal segregation and sort of caste subordination, exclusion from voting rights, participation in public places. Once the civil rights movement dismantled Jim Crow, the problem that the movement faced was that there was a rhetoric of inclusion and equality, but much like the statistics that you were just citing on Ferguson, there was an exclusion from representation in police departments. So you had all white police departments in all black neighborhoods and cities. There was an exclusion from electoral representation. So you had all white representation in all black cities and all black neighborhoods. There was also an exclusion from the middle class. And so what you had was young activists trying to find ways to break through. And what the Black Panther Party did was really it emerged as the civil rights movement unraveled, and it developed a new way of challenging the conditions in the cities of the North and the West, where there was a persistent exclusion from participation in municipal hiring, police departments, and electoral representation.
I want to add someone else to this conversation. Also joining us is lifelong activist Iyaluua Ferguson, who supports the violent response of the Missouri grand jury's decision. She joins us on the phone from Holly Springs, North Carolina. Ms. Ferguson, welcome to Arise America. Thank you for being with us. I do appreciate it. I think I do want to know what your reaction is to the unrest and the violence that we saw happen last night in response to this grand jury's decision.
You know, first of all, I'm so outraged by what just went down in Ferguson, Missouri, that it's not easy for me to answer you, because you call it violent. You call it a violent response. It was a response. It was, I think, a very human response to just years and decades and centuries of oppression. There's nothing new about this. This whole thing it's just been there.
Indeed.
And this was very human.
Indeed, Ms. Ferguson, but I want to ask you to help many, because there are many who do not understand the method by which some of these, and it's important to point out that it's not everyone out protesting that is participating in these violent clashes. But for those who don't understand what burning a building down in their own community has to do with social justice and representation in the community, help us understand that mindset. As the president just said in his statement, he says that passing a bill has nothing to do with burning a car.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But how do you decide what the reaction of a person can be? How do you make that decision? How do you know how someone feels it? In total frustration, you lash out at whatever is there. You don't go through these intellectual exercises that people are going through. You just lash out, and that gives you, I guess, some kind of release. But and that's the only way that I can explain that. Mm-hmm. I don't find this horror of, you call it a violent response. You ask me, and you ask many of us, to be concerned about a response that is about a so-called violent response be concerned about the destruction of property more than be concerned about the destruction of life, of Black life. That's what the reaction is to. That we could just be shot down and forget about it, you know?
Can I build on that?
Let me ask Joshua one quick question before we run out of time. Joshua, how should people who participate in this type of civil disobedience that does result in what many would paint as violence, how should they be regarded? Should they be regarded as criminals? Because there are those out here who would see them as such.
I want to build on Ms. Ferguson's point because I think it's a really important point. In a situation where a young Black man is 21 times more likely to be killed by police than a young white man, and where using Michelle Alexander's stats, the prison population and carceral control of Black people today is greater than the number of slaves in the United States in 1850 at the height of slavery. There's a lot of anger built up, and the question is not really whether people on the ground are being violent. The question is, are they exposing the brutality of the white control in Ferguson? It's not just that Black people aren't voting. You have to recognize that the parties, the dominant parties, didn't put forward any candidates. In 2011, all three candidates for mayor were white. In 2013, all five of the candidates put forth by the major parties, five out of six were white, with the one Black candidate winning in a landslide. So you have a situation where white control is really reticent to let go. Look at the militarized response to the protesters. So I think the question that people are facing on the ground strategically is, rather than the riots aren't going to be sustained. They're as Ms. Ferguson was saying, they're an emotional reaction. They're not sustainable. The question is, can the activists on the ground continue to force the people with the control to expose the real brutality of daily life, to bring that out into the open as they did with the militarized response?
And to that point, Ms. Ferguson, I want to give you the last word here. We literally are out of time, but I want to ask you, in this 21st century, in this high-tech age of social media and the internet, is there a better way to get this point across? If you were advising these protesters briefly, what would you tell them?
I'd say come together and keep it going. That's what I would say. Keep it going. Make it almost impossible for business to be conducted, for governing to go on. That's what I would say, because I don't know, and I don't see any change at all from what's happened today or yesterday, from what was going on in the late 50s and 60s and 70s. I don't see. Plus, let me make one thing I want to talk about, and that is the criminalization of our struggle.
Indeed.
And our people. That whole thing last night was set up, and it was set up. They wanted those riots. They wanted that violence. Otherwise, why did they hold back announcing the decision of the grand jury for some 7 hours?
And that is a very, very good question. I must jump in there. We're all out of time, but I want to thank you so much, Ms. Iyaluua Ferguson, Joshua Bloom. I appreciate both of you being here and for your perspective.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And you're watching Arise America.